hospice nurse handed me my mother's wedding ring in a plastic bag, and 20 feet away in the parking lot of the funeral home, my stepsister was already loading my mother's antique writing desk into the back of her husband's truck. I hadn't even signed the cremation papers yet. The ink on my mother's death certificate was barely dry, and they'd come with a moving van. I stood there in the gravel holding that little bag, watching my stepsister's husband bungee cord the desk that my mother used to write her grocery lists at. The desk where she'd sat the night she told me Dad was leaving us when I was 9, and something in me went very quiet. Not loud. Quiet. The kind of quiet that scares you more than screaming would. Let me back up, because if I just start with the truck and the desk, you'll think I'm one of those people who fights over furniture at a funeral. I'm not. I watched her understand exactly how I got to that gravel lot, because for 31 years I was the person who never made a scene. I was the one who made the casseroles. I was the one who drove 4 hours to fix everyone else's emergencies and then drove 4 hours home so I wouldn't be a burden by staying the night. My name doesn't matter much for this, but my mother called me her quiet one, and she meant it as a compliment, and that broke my heart in ways I'm only now starting to understand. My parents split when I was 9. My dad remarried fast, embarrassingly fast. The kind of fast where you do the math later and your stomach drops. His new wife came with a daughter my age and a younger son, and overnight I went from being an only child to being the leftover. That's the word I always used in my head. Leftover. My dad's new family lived in a big house in the suburbs with a pool, and I lived with my mom in a 2-bedroom rental where the heat clanked all night, and we ate a lot of eggs for dinner because eggs were cheap. Here's the part that took me decades to see clearly. My mother, God rest her, was so terrified of being the bitter ex-wife, so determined to prove she was the bigger person, that she spent my entire childhood pushing me toward my father's new family. Be nice to your stepsister. Family is family. Don't make waves. So I went to the birthday parties at the big house where I was always the kid nobody planned for. I sat at the kids' table when there wasn't room at the main one. I learned to be small and grateful and easy. My stepsister learned something too. She learned I'd take it. By the time we were adults, the pattern was so deep nobody could even see it anymore. When my dad died 8 years ago, his life insurance and the house went to his second wife and split between the kids of that household. I got a watch. A nice watch, sure, but a watch. And when I started to say something, my mother grabbed my arm and whispered that I should be glad he remembered me at all. And I swallowed it because that's what I did. I swallowed things. I had a whole career built on swallowing things, honestly. I'm a dental hygienist, and you'd be amazed how much of that job is keeping your face pleasant while someone is unpleasant to you. My mother got sick 3 years ago. Pancreatic. If you know, you know. It's fast, and it's cruel, and it gives you just enough time to be destroyed slowly. And here is where I need you to pay attention, because this is the part the rest of the story hangs on. For 3 years, I was the one who showed up. Not my stepsister, who lived 20 minutes away. Not her brother, who lived in the same city. Me. I rearranged my entire life. I went down to part-time at the clinic, which gutted my income, so I could drive the 90 minutes each way to take my mother to chemo. I learned how to manage her nausea meds. I learned which nurses were kind and which ones rushed. I slept in a recliner that wrecked my back for 2 years. I held a bucket for her at 3 in the morning, and I told her funny stories about my patients so she'd have something to think about besides the poison dripping into her arm. My stepsister came by maybe 6 times in 3 years. She always came with the casserole and a camera. She'd post a photo to her feed, spending precious time with family, hug your loved ones, get her 200 likes, and leave before the dishes needed doing. Her brother sent a card on Mother's Day. To my mother, who wasn't his mother. He spelled her name wrong. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because of what happened with the will. My mother and I had a conversation about 6 weeks before she died. One of the lucid days, where the morphine hadn't taken the edges off her yet. She held my hand, and she said she'd left everything to me. It wasn't much. The contents of her little house, which she rented, so no property, and a savings account she'd quietly built over the years that I had no idea about, $41,000. She'd saved it a few dollars at a time, my whole life, the eggs for dinner woman, and she'd never touched it. And there were her things, the writing desk, her mother's china, a ring my grandfather had given my grandmother, the only thing of any real value, an old European cut diamond in a setting from the 1920s. She told me where the will was, in the fireproof box under her bed with the key taped to the back of the medicine cabinet. She made me say it back to her. She was so worried even then, even dying, that her quiet one would get pushed out again. She knew. She knew her whole family. She died on a Tuesday morning. I was holding her hand. The last thing she did was squeeze it once, and I'll carry that squeeze with me until I die myself. I called my stepsister out of obligation because she was the only family left in the area. I could barely get the words out. And do you know what she said? She said, "Oh no." And then there was a pause, and then she said, "And I swear to you on my mother's grave, I am not exaggerating." She said, "Wait, before they move her, does she still have that ring? Does she still have that ring? Does she still have that ring?" My mother's body was still warm. I hung up. I told myself I'd heard it wrong. Grief makes people say strange things, right? That's what I told myself because it was easier than the truth, and I was still the woman who swallowed things. The funeral arrangements were on me, of course. My stepsister offered to help plan, which meant she texted me a link to a fancy florist and the words, "We should do this one," with no offer to pay for it. I planned a small service. I paid the deposit on my own credit card. And the morning of the cremation, when I pulled into the funeral home lot with my mother's death certificate to sign, that's when I saw the truck. That's when I saw the writing desk in the back of it. My stepsister's husband was a big, doughy man who never in 20 years had said more than 10 words to me. He was cinching the straps. And there she was, my stepsister, carrying out a box that I recognized. My grandmother's china, wrapped in my mother's china, wrapped in my mother's good towels. She saw me, and she didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She smiled. She had a clipboard, if you can believe that. She said, "Oh good, you're here. I've been making a list of who gets what. You can have the kitchen stuff." The kitchen stuff. I want to tell you I confronted her right there. I didn't. The funeral director was waiting. My mother's body was inside. I had a certificate to sign with my hands shaking. And the old reflex kicked in, the be small reflex, the don't make waves reflex, the don't make waves reflex, 31 years deep. I signed the papers. I said almost nothing. I drove home with my mother's wedding ring in a plastic bag on the passenger seat, and I sat in my driveway and I shook. And then I did the math. She had a clipboard. She had a moving van booked. She had her husband. This wasn't grief. You don't book a van in the 8 hours since someone died because you're overcome with emotion. She planned this. She'd been planning this, probably for weeks. Probably from the day the hospice nurse used the word weeks. She thought there was no will. Or she was betting there wasn't, because for our whole lives I had never once stood up. And why would the leftovers suddenly grow a spine now? So, I want to tell you about the phone call I made. Because everyone always asks, what changed? What was the moment? And it wasn't the desk, and it wasn't even, does she still have that ring? It was the clipboard. It was the casual little smile when she said, "You can have the kitchen stuff," like she was doing me a favor with my own mother's life. I went inside, I sat at my own kitchen table, and I called my mother's lawyer. My mother, the eggs for dinner woman, had done one thing in her life that her family never expected. About a year into her diagnosis, on one of those 90-minute drives, she'd asked me to take her to an office in a strip mall. She said she had errands. I'd assumed it was the pharmacy. It was an estate attorney, a woman named Imani who did wills and trusts for working people, the kind of lawyer who charges a flat fee and doesn't make you feel poor. My mother had paid her in installments. She'd made a will, and she'd done one more thing I didn't know about until that phone call. She'd named me executor, and she'd had the savings account converted to payable on death directly to me, which meant it never even entered the estate. It was already legally mine. My stepsister could not touch it, could not even see it. The lawyer was kind on the phone. She'd been expecting my call, she said, because my mother had told her, "When I go, the vultures will come fast and my daughter won't fight them, so you have to help her fight." My mother had said that, about her own family, to a stranger in a strip mall. I got off the phone, and for the first time in my life, I felt something other than the quiet. I felt clear. The will was exactly where she'd told me. Fireproof box, key behind the medicine cabinet. I drove to her little rented house that same night. I still had a key, of course. I was the one who'd been there every day, and I let myself in. And the first thing I noticed was that the lock had been changed. The lock had been changed. My key didn't work. On my own dead mother's house. The house I'd been caring for her in for 3 years. My stepsister had called the landlord, claimed to be next of kin, and had the locks changed the same day my mother died so she could remove things for safekeeping. I stood on that porch in the dark and I did not cry. I called the landlord, a decent older guy named Mr. Tomlin who'd known my mom for years, and I explained who I was, and I told him I was the executor of her estate and that no one had the legal right to be removing property and that I'd be sending him documentation in the morning. He was horrified. He said he'd assumed the woman who called was me. He said he'd never have changed the locks. He gave me a new key himself, in person, at 9 the next morning, and he stood there while I went in. Half the house was already gone. The desk, obviously, that was in the truck. The china, gone. My grandmother's good linens, gone. The few decent pieces of furniture, gone. They'd taken the television. They'd taken the microwave, for God's sake. They'd gone through her jewelry box and taken everything except the costume pieces. They'd left the eggs in the fridge and taken everything that could be sold, but they hadn't found the fireproof box, because it was under the bed, and the bed had a long bed skirt, and people in a hurry don't get on their knees and look under things. They'd flipped the mattress looking for cash. The box was still there. Inside was the will, the original, signed, witnessed, notarized. Inside was the grandmother's diamond ring. My mother had taken it off her own hand months ago and hidden it there because she knew that the moment she was too weak to wear it, it would walk out the door. And inside was a letter. To me. I'm not going to read you the whole letter. Some things stay between a mother and her quiet one, but she wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that she spent my childhood teaching me to make myself small so I'd be loved, and that it was the worst thing she ever did, and she did it out of her own fear, and she'd watched me grow into a kind woman who let everyone walk on her, and she knew exactly whose fault that was. She wrote, "Be loud now. I should have taught you to be loud. Start with them. Start with them." So I did. The next morning I drove to my stepsister's house. The desk was on her front porch, half unwrapped, like a trophy. I didn't knock. I took a photo of it from the street with the address visible. Then I drove to the police station and I filed a report for theft and unlawful entry with the executor documents the lawyer had emailed me overnight, and the photo and the landlord's statement. The officer who took it was a woman about my age, and when I got to the part about, "Does she still have that ring?" she put down her pen and just looked at me for a second, and she said, "We're going to take care of this." What my stepsister never understood is that grief is not a legal defense. I assumed I'd inherit is not a legal defense. Taking property out of an estate before it's probated after changing the locks under false pretenses is not a misunderstanding. It's a crime, and in our state, given the value of what they took, it was a felony. The lawyer sent a demand letter. Return every item, itemized, within 10 days, or face criminal prosecution and a civil suit. My stepsister called me 20 times that day. I let it go to voicemail every single time. The voicemails were a masterclass. First, she was breezy. "This is all a big misunderstanding. Let's talk. We're family." Then she was wounded. "I can't believe you'd involve the police. Your mother would be ashamed." That one almost got me. Almost. Then she got nasty and she said the thing that told me everything. She said, "You always thought you were better than us. The poor relation playing the martyr. You're not getting that ring. It should have been mine. I'm the one who deserves nice things." I saved that voicemail. I sent it to the lawyer. I sent it to the police. They returned everything. Not because they had a change of heart, because their own lawyer, once they finally hired one, told them they were one phone call away from being arrested in front of their children. The desk came back. The china came back, 2 pieces chipped, and I made them pay for that too. The television, the microwave, every last spoon. Her husband drove it all back in that same truck and unloaded it onto my mother's porch without a word, and this time it was him who couldn't look at me. The ring, of course, they never had. It was on my finger by then. It's on my finger now as I tell you this. European cut, a little warm against my skin. My stepsister told everyone in the extended family that I was greedy, that I'd lawyered up over a dead woman's junk, that I'd torn the family apart. And here is the thing I learned, the thing I wish I could go back and tell the 9-year-old at the kids' table. There was no family to tear apart. There never had been. You cannot tear apart something that doesn't exist. What I'd been protecting my whole life, with all that swallowing, with all that be small, was a fiction. A polite arrangement where I gave and they took. The $41,000 is in an account I haven't touched. I think about my mother saving it a few dollars at a time, eating eggs, denying herself, also her quiet one would have something. I'm going to use it to take the trip she never got to take. She always wanted to see the redwoods. She used to say a person should stand next to something that's been alive for 2,000 years to get a little perspective. I'm going in the fall. I'm bringing the ring. My stepsister sent me a message a few weeks ago after the dust settled. Long, performative, all about healing and life's too short, and how she forgives me for my mother's microwave coming back to me. I didn't write back a paragraph. I'm done writing paragraphs to people like her. I wrote 4 words, the ones my mother left me, the only inheritance that ever mattered. I wrote, "I'm loud now. Goodbye." And then I blocked her number, and I made myself eggs for dinner the way my mother used to, and for the first time in 31 years, they didn't taste like being poor. They tasted like hers. They tasted like home.